So now let's talk about the group of coronaviruses that are most related to the current one that causes COVID-19. In particular, just can you give me some context of what happened with the MERS and SARS outbreaks? And really, what I'm getting at is towards the origin of the virus. But I'd like to hear a little bit about those first.
Okay, well, the first major coronavirus outbreak that we had was the original SARS outbreak, and that was in the early 2000s, I think 2002. And it came from an exotic, a wet market, which means a market that sells live animals that are not your normal domesticated animals, they're exotic animals. And so we learned that the virus came from something called a civet cat, which is not what you think of when you're really thinking of a cat. It's a little different. But really, when we were able to investigate it further, we learned it came from bats. And so it had gone from a bat to probably a civet cat, and from there to humans. And then once it adapted to humans, it spread very effectively. It caused a bad respiratory disease, and it killed a lot of people. That was the original one. Then in around 2008, there was another outbreak, and that was the virus called MERS, MERS. And that one, we know it was in the Middle East. That's why it's called MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. It came from a camel, came from camels to humans. But again, the camels were not the original host. Came from bats into camels, into humans. And the camel story is a little interesting because it spread from the camels to the humans because the humans, in the Middle East, a lot of people have very personal relationships with their camels. They're beasts of burden. They really depend on them for their work and their livelihood, but they have very close and long relationships with them, and they are very intimate with those animals. They snuggle with them. And so that's probably part of how it spread from the camels to the humans.
I wouldn't think people had the same relationship with those civet cats. I wonder, how did it get
No,
from the civet cat into humans?
probably just contamination, hands, things like that, just wet stuff.
And what do we know about the origin of this new coronavirus?
Well, we know that it almost definitely came from a bat. Now, how do we know that? Well, we can sequence the genetic material of these viruses. And part of the fact that their sequences are very similar is what helps us group them into families. But there are a lot of subtleties to those sequences. So in a family, we would say the family of coronaviruses all have similar sequences. Well, similar just means a certain amount of similarity. It's like you might look similar to a relative. You look closer to maybe your dad than you do to your grandfather. We can talk about that similarity, and we can use that similarity to trace where a virus came from. So just like Ancestry.com or something like that, where you're looking to say, what am I most closely related to? We can do that with viruses. And using that, we can figure out that this virus is incredibly closely related. This SARS-2 coronavirus is incredibly closely related to a bat virus we've known for quite a while. So we are very confident it came from that bat. Now, we don't know whether it came directly from the bat into humans or whether there was an animal intermediate like the civet cat was for SARS, the original SARS, and like the camel was for MERS.
Why bats? MERS, SARS, and this one. I know they're related, but why are bats this common source for these viruses?
Well, bats actually are infected with many different coronaviruses we don't even know about yet. And those coronaviruses don't make the bats sick. We don't really know why. We have some theories. But The bat just doesn't really seem to care that the coronavirus is in it. A given bat might be infected with as many as 6 different coronaviruses. Those coronaviruses can recombine and can make new coronaviruses, and they're just waiting to exploit an opportunity to jump into a new location. So the bat is like a little incubator, constantly spitting out not only the original coronaviruses that infected it, but new combinations of coronaviruses. And when we bring those bats into our environment, like at wet markets, or indirectly through animals that were exposed to those bats, or we encroach on our rainforests and bring the bats into our backyards, we are exposing ourselves to those coronaviruses. There will be more of them.